Did you ever hear something said on TV that just blows the wind right out of you? One of those times that causes you to stop dead in your tracks and think, oh, this wasn't one of those reality show storylines? This was the very moment that everything really began to collapse. And for the Brown family, those words were spoken by Cody himself. Nearly proudly, he explained, I met Robyn and she was this diesel jeans model. She was everything I wanted. Like that. As if he'd found a gleaming new trophy in a department store shelf. Frankly, that one sentence explained more about the collapse of his family than any session of therapy ever could. Hey guys, welcome back to Reality Recap. I'm Ania, and today we're diving into one of the most devastating transformations ever seen on Sister Wives. If you've ever wondered how a once-tight family can turn into something completely unrecognizable, this is it. Don't forget to press that subscribe button and like this video if you've been riding with the Browns all these years. And please, leave your comments below. I really do want to know how you felt when you heard that infamous diesel jeans model line for the first time. Did it resonate with you as much as it resonated with me? Let's turn back, not all the way to the start, but to when the cracks originally began to appear. When Cody introduced Robyn into the family, there was excitement, curiosity, and let's be real, tension. But it wasn't until years down the track, during Janelle's offhand conversation on air, that we actually understood the significance of what had altered. She recalled Cody almost radiant when he declared Robyn was everything he ever wanted, as if he'd just scored a supermodel, not, she's kind, she's strong, she's grounded in her faith. But diesel jeans model. That wasn't a careless remark. It was when the fantasy completely dissolved. Because for Janelle, and likely for Christine and Mary as well, it hadn't sounded like appreciation. It sounded like a man who'd begun treating his wives as co-equals no longer, but as trophies in a line. One wife to be the mama for the kids, another to provide peace of mind, and one, Robyn, to dazzle like a personal triumph. She was more than a victory. She was the victory. And consider what that does to a family that was, at least theoretically, constructed on the grounds of plural marriage, on balance, equal love, shared responsibility, emotional fairness. But as soon as Cody put Robyn on a pedestal, all that changed. And not in some subtle manner either. This wasn't about favoritism anymore. It became a complete overhaul of the family's spiritual map. Everyone else sensed it. And it wasn't jealousy. It was erasure. Picture devoting your life to raising children, giving up sleep, time, and your own ambitions, and having the man you referred to as your husband breezily fawning over someone else being everything I ever wanted. That's not just hurtful. That's humiliating. And the worst part of it was, Cody didn't even appear to realize what he was saying. He actually seemed to believe the fantasy, this entire tale he'd invented in his head about who Robyn was and what she represented. She became less a human and began more as a brand, his validation badge, his image upgrade. Robyn wasn't simply becoming a member of the family, she was redefining it. And as for the rest of them, they were to either fall into line or disappear. From there on out, you could see it, plain as day. The emotional imbalance didn't gradually seep in, it crashed through like a wrecking ball. Cody ceased to appear for his other wives the way that he had. His time, his attention, his affection, all poured in one direction. And the rest of the family began disintegrating under the pressure of that alteration. And this wasn't so much about Robyn. It was about what she symbolized to Cody. A fantasy. A definition of love that may have seemed perfect on the outside, but cost everything real inside. And that's where the heartbreak really started. Loving someone is one thing. Translating that love into a symbol, a trophy, that's something else. And that's just what Cody did. Robyn didn't just become wife number 4 to him. She became his confirmation, that he'd made it, and he wasn't going to let anyone forget. When Janelle remembered that moment, when Cody said to her Robyn was some model for diesel jeans, you could hear the change in her voice. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't melodramatic. She was just finished. Her voice was calm, but her words were cutting. You just take your little diesel jeans model and go live happily ever after. And what's crazy? That moment was years ago, but it lingered with her, because how could it not? That was more about Robyn than just a remark. It was a glimpse into what Cody had grown to appreciate. Suddenly, it wasn't about having a life together or having a spiritual bond. It was all about looks, about how Robyn presented him. That entire diesel jeans model comment? It didn't sound very lovey-dovey. It sounded more like a man boasting about receiving a ribbon at the county fair. And when love starts to sound like a sales pitch, that's when you know something's broken. Robyn wasn't just another wife to Cody. She was a status symbol, in his opinion. He held on to this narrative, sharing it with Janelle, with interviewers, and even years later on the Mormonism Live podcast. He continued to harp on about other men from their church wanting Robyn, how she picked him, and how that left him feeling like he was a victor. And really, it sounded like he was attempting to convince himself as much as anyone else. Like, see? Look what I got. She could have chosen anybody, but she chose me. That must make me worth something. But here's the rub. When somebody is your validation mirror, everyone else recedes into the background. Cody stopped viewing the other women in his life as whole people. They began to become triggers of how they didn't live up to this idealized, near-mythic construct he'd created in his own mind. And let's break down that fantasy for a moment, because it wasn't reality-based. There's never been any concrete proof that Robyn did ever model for Diesel. Reddit's hypothesized perhaps she did a local promotional or small fashion shoot or whatever once. But at the end of the day, the point doesn't even matter. It was never about real modeling. It was about Cody hanging on to a version of Robyn that made him feel like a winner, like a man who had won big. And Robyn? She went along with that story from day one. Gave Cody something the others wouldn't, or perhaps couldn't, after all they'd already been through with him. She stood by him, praised him, treated him as the man he needed to think he still was. She validated him. Again and again, not only in private but on TV, in family sessions, in every interaction where Cody needed a boost, Robyn was out there, front and center, his most vocal advocate. But that type of compliment becomes authority. And when that authority is constructed on pedestal thinking, it doesn't stand. That's not love. That's idolizing. And once one human becomes the exclusive source of your pride and emotional attachment, everyone else is simply left circling around an iteration of you they can no longer access. Christine noticed. Mary did too. And Janelle? She ultimately named it. Even while Cody's marriages were dissolving, he continued to recount the same tale, how Robyn believed in him, how she was loyal, gorgeous, spiritually attuned. But the morals upon which he hung on were different now. They weren't based on equity, collaboration, nor equilibrium. It was based on admiration, on being adored, on being correct. And it truly makes one question: was this ever about Robyn, or was it about what Cody needed her to symbolize? That's the real tragedy, because Robyn became a symbol. And symbols do not get to be human. They don't get to flub, to break, to have bad days. But neither do the women who are made to battle with that image. Christine and Janelle struggled for years, attempting to justify why they were being set aside. And Mary? She held on to a spiritual marriage that, in Cody's mind, had been dead years earlier than the actual divorce papers entered the picture. Because when love turns into a trophy, it no longer is love. It becomes performance. and someone always gets left trapped behind the curtain. It didn't come apart in one night, but eventually, that family Cody had worked so hard to build began slipping quietly away. Janelle and Mary, who had once been pillars of that plural foundation, began to emotionally check out. You could hear it in their voices, see it in what they ceased to say. That moment when Janelle tossed out, "Take your diesel jeans model and go live happily ever after," wasn't just sarcasm. It was a line drawn in the sand. It was her way of saying, "I'm done pretending this still makes sense." And Mary, her withdrawal was less overt, but as agonizing. She remained faithful longer than people ever thought she would, but in remaining, she disappeared. No longer part of family deliberations, no longer really wanted, perhaps only as a living reminder of the past. The weddings no longer resembled a shared existence. They began to resemble a ladder, Robyn firmly at the top, and the rest? Hanging in the breeze or slipping quietly away, one by one. What had been oneness had turned into a structure of power, and Cody, whether Cody noticed it or not, did not matter anymore. He was not a husband to many men anymore. He was a man holding on to one thin definition of love, while everything else slipped quietly away behind him. And then there was this moment that nothing could have ready anyone for, not the family, not the audience, not even Cody himself. It occurred during the May 4th show. The screen went dark. The air was thicker. And in a split second, the Brown family was faced with the type of tragedy that no parent ever wants to experience. Madison Brown, son of Janelle and Cody, was dead. There was no cliffhanger, no staged shock. It was muted, bare, honest. TLC did not add music, did not cut in tearful interviews. Only a black screen, white letters, no noise. And that silence spoke more than any sit-down confession ever could. Janelle's voice broke as she said she'd texted Garrison that day as if it were any typical Tuesday, sent him a lighthearted message like nothing was out of the ordinary. Mary, when Cody finally called her back, could hardly process what he was telling her. Garrison had killed himself. Those words brought time to a halt. You could watch them hit Mary like a wave she wasn't prepared for, and Cody. When he finally collapsed, you could sense every aspect of it, the grief, the guilt, the sorrow. His speech, "I didn't get a chance to really make things right," carried weight. You could sense he knew. This wasn't the passing of a son. This was a mirror held to a relationship that was never fixed. All the years of separation, the struggle for control, the quiet, the tension surrounding COVID, the brazen favoritism, it all came tumbling down under the weight of what was lost. And suddenly, it was all for nothing. The cost had never been more obvious. The saddest thing? Nobody really saw it coming. Garrison, the guy who made us laugh, who texted his mom 3 times a day, had been quietly living with so much more than any of us had ever known. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a reckoning. It took the most unimaginable type of heartbreak to finally push the truth into the open. After Garrison died, it wasn't only sorrow spilling out of Janelle. It was unmistakable clarity. She'd stood guard for years. She held her ground. She maintained peace. But now, there was nothing left to defend. One of the saddest lines in the whole episode was when she told them, "I know that he's dead, but I forget. And then I remember." Those couple of sentences held unutterable agony, but they also revealed just how long she'd been keeping it all together, on sheer willpower alone. The family, the marriage, the facade. And now, she was finally releasing all of it. She cleaned out. She closed the door on Flagstaff. She moved to North Carolina, not to be nearer to Maddie and the grandbabies, but to finally catch her breath, to start anew, not for Cody, not for anyone else, but for herself. There is something oddly beautiful about what she decided to do next. A flower farm, Tata Farms. It's not a business concept, it's a form of healing, an opportunity to bury her hands in the ground and cultivate something lovely in a world that had already taken enough. Janelle's story isn't one of escaping, it's one of returning to life. It's about finding roots in something real, something tangible. Because after all the big ideals and spiritual vows, what she needed most was something basic and real, something she could have faith in again. And this time, that something wasn't Cody. Both Janelle and Mary came to the point where remaining meant losing themselves. This wasn't merely a legal split, it was what they referred to as a spiritual divorce. They came to see they couldn't continue standing in the shadow of Cody, playing supporting roles in a tale no longer theirs. These women had held on to hope for so long that the family could stay together, that plural marriage could still work. But gradually, agony, a sense finally dawned on them. Waiting wasn't healing. It was holding them hostage. So they quit waiting for the change that never happened. They quit shrinking themselves in a story that had space for only one star. Janelle's relocation to North Carolina was more than a matter of geography. It was a reclaiming, a fearless step toward retelling her story on her own terms. Mary also stepped away, clearing space to mourn, to process, and to remember who she was beyond Cody's universe. And as the two women advanced, Cody's world shrunk. Increasingly isolated, encircled by regrets, strained relationships, and the echo of a family he no longer knew how to command. What Cody was frantically holding on to was already disintegrating, slipping through his fingers. And the irony couldn't have been greater. While he was hanging on more tightly to control, the women were already in motion, moving towards healing, towards reclaiming themselves. This wasn't merely a matter of legal divorce or marriage failure. This was about freedom, about finally stepping out from behind the curtain and deciding on themselves. That now notorious diesel jeans model remark? It wasn't a flippant boast. It became an emblem, a fantasy Cody clung to, a fantasy that cost him much more than he ever could have dreamed. The instant he placed Robyn on that pedestal, love ceased to be about the center. It moved into something else, something superficial. It turned into something about status, about appearances, about approval. And that shiny facade only hid the cracks below. And what makes it all the more tragic is that fantasy didn't only uplift Robyn, it brought everyone else down. Janelle, Mary, Christine, they began to vanish in Cody's mind. And that kind of invisibility? It hurts a lot. It not only destroyed their marriages, it peeled away from the very foundation of what was to be a family based on common belief, sacrifice, and togetherness. What it became instead was a pecking order, where love was allocated on spotlight minutes, where one woman was worshipped and the others are left muted in the shadows. But here's the most potent part. These women didn't merely walk away from Cody. They walked back to themselves. They didn't merely leave a relationship. They took back their narratives. That requires a species of strength most people never learn until they are standing in its presence. Janelle's relocation to North Carolina, Mary's unspoken choice to step away, Mary forging her own path, once more. These weren't conclusions. They were beginnings. So the next time you view the show, beyond the drama, beyond the slick moments, keep in mind, behind the scenes is a sort of agony that hardly makes the screen. Not the sort that commands headlines, but the sort that quietly forges lives behind the scenes. What these women present to us is basic, yet forceful. Sometimes the most difficult thing is not to hold on. it's to let go and to choose yourself. That is the story that really counts, and it is a tale worth telling.